Welcome to this DaVinci Resolve Fusion node breakdown. Today's node is the Warper node, and this is a DaVinci Resolve effect available within Fusion, and it is studio version only. So let's jump into Fusion, and I'm going to hit Shift Space and add a Warper node. And what the Warper node does is it allows you to freeform image warp images around points or curves to push or stretch the image. So just to show you, create something, and what it's going to do is going to allow me to, if I select warp the image based off of where my warp is. And we can do that on the curves, or we can do it on points. So if I warp, let me get a couple points. So if I warp, you can see we're warping the image. And as I said, there's two modes. There is the curves and the points. And we'll cover the curves first. Now up top, we have three little selections here: add, adjust, and warp. And these are going to change what you're doing to your points. So let's say I add a little warp area here. It's automatically going to switch over to adjust as soon as I'm done. So if I need to add more, I need to re-click this add button and add more little points. And you notice it popped right back over to the adjust. Now, if I want to shut that off so it's not doing that, I can go down to the advanced. In this auto advanced to adjust mode, if I uncheck that, go to my add and select little points, you can see it's staying on my add, so I can add more and it's not popping over there automatically. So if that gets annoying, you can uncheck this or check it. So if we add more, you can see it just popped back over to adjust. So now we can adjust any of our points. And if we're adjusting, we're only adjusting our points or our curves. We're not warping. This is just adjusting. If we want to warp, we have to select the warp button. Now we can warp any of these points or any of the little curves. So let's go ahead and refresh. So adding points and adding curves is pretty simple. So let's shut this off so it's not going over to adjust. So if I need to add a curve, I can just select, add my little curve. And if I want to auto close it, I can either select this to close it off, or I can just hit enter and it's automatically going to close from the last point to the first point. Additionally, if I want to add curves with handles, if I click and drag, it's going to add curves to my points. Now, once I have my points, I can change what type of points they are. So right here, we have these little squared out points with no handles. So if I select this, I can go down to my selected points and I can change it to rounded, and it's going to give me handles. Additionally, if I select one with handles, I can select corner and it's going to create a corner point. And what symmetric is, if I go to my adjust mode and I select multiple points and select this symmetric, it's going to symmetrically select all those. Now I can select points individually, and I can select my curves individually. So if I select the actual line of the curve, now I can adjust anything down here. And if I want to reopen that where I closed it, I can open it or I can close it. If I want to show or hide my handles, I can show or hide my handles, so then I can adjust them. If I want to change this to a limiter, and what a limiter is it's a point that's going to limit your warping. So right now, if I go to my warp node and let's say I warp this, it's going to use these as warp nodes as well. But if I go to my adjust mode and let's say I select this curve, if I go here, I can select limiter. So once it's red, that means it's going to limit my warping. So if I go back to warping and I warp this, it's going to limit around this limit area. So to show that a little better, let's go ahead and add some points. And I'm just going to add some on her. And if I hit my escape key, it'll end my little line. I don't have to have a closed curve. And if I select this, I can say I want this to be a limiter. So now if I go add new points to say here, hit my escape key, and I go to my warp and I select this, I can warp it on the entire curve, or I can warp it on the point, and you can see it's limiting where that warp is occurring. Because if I did not have this one, if I select this curve, I can delete it. So now you can see without that limiter, it's warping my entire image. Even on my points, it's warping the entire image. So let's go ahead and reset. Now additionally, let's go ahead and shut this auto advanced to adjust mode. There's other shortcuts for when I'm creating stuff. So like I said, I can click and drag and create a curve. And if I hit enter, it'll close it. And if I hold my shift key down and click, it'll allow me to create limiters. So now that is a limiter, as long as I hold my shift key. And then I can go back and just create another regular curve for warping. Now, if I am in either add or adjust mode, if I select my option or alt and click, I can add a new curve. And again, I'll show you we're in adjust. If I hold alt or option, I can click and add a new curve. I don't need to be in the add mode because it's automatically going to switch me over to the add mode if I hit that alt or option key. Now under here, we have this render a reference grid. And if you notice, in add mode, we can't turn it on. In adjust mode, we can't turn it on. But if we're in warp mode, we can turn it on. And it's going to give us this reference grid for warping. So now we can warp. Oh, that was my limiter. Now we can warp using that grid. And the grid is going to warp along with us. Now, if you notice this little dotted line here, this is our origin reference, and we can adjust it right here. So we can make it brighter or dimmer. If you also notice, if I take this point and I move it in, we get this red line. That's just showing the direction of that origin point. And then down here, we have warp strength. So I can change the warp strength. Now, these two are only available if I'm in the warp. So if I'm in adjust, you notice I can't change it. If I'm in the add, I can't change it. So they're only available when I'm in the warp mode. And then down here, we have the ability to reset handle adjustments. So if I reset, or if I say select a handle and I change it, I can reset it, or I can reset the warp. And I would have to select what warps I'm resetting and reset them. So let's go ahead and refresh. And to be able to show this difference between the position keyframe and warp keyframe, let's go ahead and just add a quick little line. I'm going to hit escape. Now, if I want to animate my position keyframe, it's going to be separate than my warping keyframe. For example, I can come in here and if I go to the beginning and I keyframe it, I go here and I adjust my position. Now my position is keyframed. So if I go back and hit play, you can see my position is keyframed. And if I select warp even, you notice it's not changing my warp because I only keyframe the position, which you may need to do if you need to change or track something, but you don't want it to warp that point. So you can animate the positioning separately than your warping. Now, if I do want to warp, if I go to the beginning and let's say we want to warp this point, but not that point, I can select warp keyframe, go to my next keyframe, and I can warp my image. So now my image is warped on this point, but not on this point. So that's why you have separate position and warping keyframes. For my on-screen controls, if I go ahead and add a curve, once I go to my warp mode, my on-screen controls become available. So I can show them all, I can hide them all, or I can auto hide. So if I select this point, it's going to auto hide those little markers for me. And additionally, we can change the scale. So I can make those markers larger or smaller. Under advanced options, we have limits. And what your limits do is it adjusts your limits of your actual warping and how it interacts with the pixels around. So right now it's set to distant, which means it's going to lock parts of your image that are n pixels away from your point. And what n pixels are, we don't know, but it's n pixels away from your point. So if I warp, it's going to warp n pixels away from my point. So a certain amount of pixels away from that. Now, if I pin at corners, it's going to attempt to pin the corners. So if I warp this, you can see my corners are all pinned as best as possible. Or I can select around the edges. So it's going to pin the edges as best as possible. And I can also select manual or free floating. So it's just going to free float that entire image. Under elasticity, this is just how our warps are reacting. So by default, it's set to rubber, which is kind of the middle point. So if I really cram this and I go to fabric, you can see it's going to be a little more pinchy, like fabric. Or I can select jelly, which is going to be smoother and more of a curve. Or I can select rubber, which is going to be somewhat in between fabric and jelly. Now our edge behavior is simply that, our edge behavior, where our image is leaving our edges. So right now it's set to black, which means it's going to be black or transparent. I can also select reflect, wrap around, and replicate. And our warp detail is exactly that, how detailed our warp is. If we have faster, it's going to be less detailed and faster on our computer. Better is going to be harder on our computer, but better warp details. And then default is in the middle. So let's go ahead and refresh this and let's select points. Now the points is going to allow you to add points. So if I want to warp, I can add multiple points and I can independently warp each point. Additionally, I can add a reference grid. So I can have a reference grid for those points. So if I turn this grid on, I can use this grid to create points if I want. And under the points, just by simply clicking, you're adding warp points. But if I hold shift and click, I'm going to add limiter points. And you notice the red. So now that means our warp is going to be limited around that area. And if I select show origin locations, it's going to give me a little arrow to show the origin locations. So if I change this, it's going to show where the origins are with a line. If I shut it off, they will not be there. And down here, I can clear all my points. Additionally, if I create a warp, I can reset my warp. We also have warp strength, so I can change how strong that overall warp is. And then up here we have positions. So if I reset, let's go to points. Let's put a little point on our earring there, and let's hold shift. Let's add a couple limiters. So if I select this point, if I keyframe my position and I go further down, I can warp it, and now it's animated. Under on-screen controls, it's the same as our curves. So if I have warp positions here, I can show them, I can hide them, or I can auto hide them. So if I select this one, it'll auto hide my points. And then our warp boundaries are for our limiters. So if I say hold shift and create a couple limiters here. Right now we're not showing any boundaries. If I show as a border, it's going to show the border of our limits. So as I change this, you can see our border is changing. Or I can show it as a mask. And I'm not going to select this because it's going to shut down DaVinci Resolve like it does every single time for some reason. Don't know why, but it does. But if you do select as mask, what it's going to do is just going to have your little border, but this is all going to be darkened out like a mask. And then under scale controls, we can change the size of our little points. For advanced controls, they're all the same as they are for the curve, other than down here we have effect follows. And what this effect follows means is if we change the sizing of our input or edit the sizing of our footage here, it's going to maintain our points according to the size of our footage. Or we can select it follows the timeline size. Now, one other difference is how our limits work on our points. So we have the same limits, but they work differently. And by default, it's set to distant. So if I change this, it's changing by n distance of pixels. But if I select pin at corners, it's actually going to create pins or limiters on our corners. So you can see them. It's creating pins or limiters. And if I select around the edges, it's going to create pins or limiters around the edges. And then manual is going to function the same as well as distant. So to recap, we have two modes, curves and points. Curves allows you to create curves. And if we select our warp, we can warp our image around those curves or those points within the curves. And we have points as a warp node. So shift space, create limiters, create points for warping, and then we can warp our image as we need. So that is the Warper node. I will see you in the next node breakdown.